Dublin's fair city, where the girls are so pretty, I first laid my eyes on sweet.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of LGBTlife on this fabulously sunny Dublin afternoon. Isn't the city terrific when it's that bright and occasionally warm even? And today we are delighted to have as our guest a woman I'm calling the remarkable Claire Farrell. She's the Vice Chair of TENI. She's also on the Fine Gael LGBT, is it steering committee, Claire? Committee. So, Claire Farrell, welcome to LGBTlife and welcome to Dublin City FM.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Claire, not only are you a local in the north side, you went to school in the same place as I did. What's your memories back of Joey Small those days?
Oh my God, that's a long time ago, Mick. I suppose in many ways I've fond memories. Mm-hmm. I've some memories I'd rather forget. Mm-hmm. The Christian Brothers had a bit of a reputation, and I was no different to anybody else. I came foul of it.
Something that just struck me as I was coming down on the bus, passing by the old school itself. I mean, do you think we became the people we are because of them or in spite of them?
Well, in fairness, I think we became the people we are because of them. Mm-hmm. They certainly gave us a good education. Mm-hmm. I have no regrets about any of that. But there were aspects to the way they did things that I wouldn't have agreed with.
Yes. Well, those I'm told that a lot of those have changed in the meantime. So let's say that like the wider society, the education system has changed for the better anyway. Yeah.
Certainly it has. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I mean, Joey's is a great old school. It's has great reputation. There's lots of well-known people who went there. Leaders in our community, in our business community.
National leaders even.
Yeah, national leaders even. Yes. Yes.
Looking back then, Claire, I mean, in many respects, although we possibly travelled on different paths, you and I would suspect, shared certain aspects of the same journey. What's your memory of growing up as a person on the north side? I mean, did you always have this, shall we say, this feeling that something's not quite here and I need to change something? Was that something that was always with you?
I'm afraid it was. From a very young age, I knew there was something different about me. I'd say about 6 years of age, I had a realization. I didn't have the vocabulary to explain it, and that took many years to acquire. But I was aware that I was different when I first put on my sister's dress, and I just felt this is me. This should be me. And from that moment on, I felt that there's a big problem here. I must conceal it, because I think in those days,
at the very least, it was a sin.
Oh, at the very least, and later on, my mother, God rest her, when she one day found me dressed as a girl, she was horrified, and she hauled me off to a priest who heard my confession. I mean, when I laugh at that now, I mean, that was so ridiculous. You know, what sin had I committed?
I know. Well, I'll come to that one in a second there. But how was it at school for you? Because I particularly remember when Joey's was a sporting school in that sense. It liked to pride itself, excuse me, on its sporting reputation. Now I can remember clearly when we were about 13 or thereabouts, we used to go to sports across the park whatever it was. It didn't matter, rain, hail, snow, we went out there. But there was always a group of people that really were not remotely interested in sport. They might have been academically inclined, who knows. But they were made to dress up in sporting gear, given a football, And it was always called the Cripple's Acre. Do you remember that?
I remember it well. But I have to tell you that because I was aware that I was different and there was the feminine aspect to me, in order to cover up for that, I actually tried to be more macho than the other guy.
Compensating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I did participate in the sports.
Yeah.
I was never very good, but I tried.
Yeah.
And I played hurling and I played football. Not very well.
Yeah.
I think they sometimes despaired at my abilities, but at least I was out there trying.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's my memory is that if you went out there and you did that blokey stuff, you were cool.
Yeah.
But I still have visions of these group of people just walking up and down that pitch, and the ball sat there in the middle, and it never moved from one end of the season to the other. Their jerseys never got dirty. Their socks or their shorts never got dirty, and they made no bones about it to us that this was the Cripple's Acre, that there was something wrong with these people.
That's right.
Yeah. It's.
Oh, I mean, I've memories of that. But I did play quite a bit of football. In fact, unfortunately, I played some soccer too.
Oh, yes,
and
that would have got you into
didn't go
trouble.
down too well, I can tell you. And I got caught playing soccer one time with a few friends in the schoolyard.
Yeah.
And there was hell to pay for that, I can tell you.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
Well, I was a few years after you, and of course we decided, well, we have to push them that much further. So we started a rugby team.
Oh, wow.
And they wouldn't allow us to even change in the school. That's
Oh yeah. Oh no, I mean, thankfully all that's changed now, and it's much better, and there's a better attitude to all kinds of sports as far as schools are concerned.
But again, and this is why I wanted to just tease this out with you. My memory was at that time there was an enormous pressure to conform. In other words, we didn't like any deviancy whatsoever, whether it was growing your hair or there were certain things you could get away with, like smoking cigarettes or whatever, even having a drink. But I can remember if you looked at the girls down at Marino Tech, that was a problem.
That's right.
If you went playing snooker, that was a problem.
That's right.
And if you played soccer, that was a problem. Is that your memory as well?
It's very much my memory. The other thing was that, of course, that I had this need to dress as a girl.
Yeah.
So there was a constant pressure, and the reason I needed to dress as a girl because inside I was trans, and I was grappling with that, in order to try and defeat it in some way, I would keep myself so busy that I hadn't time to think about myself. I was involved in scouts and all that kind of thing in those days, and I was so busy all the time, and then that way I wasn't allowing time for myself, which was probably a good thing in some ways. But I mean, it always came back to haunt you.
Yep.
Because I had to be who I was, and I couldn't be.
Yep. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you were probably there around the same time as I was, and deviancy, more than anything else, was represented by a couple of teachers. Now, as I say, and as a result, I always found that, particularly with one teacher, I'm not going to mention names or anything like that, but I said to people, I went through that school and nobody there was gay. Now, we know now that that's ridiculous. I now make a joke and I say, I wonder who the other people were who were a bit odd. But that was what gay represented to us. It was something sordid, it was something that was deviant, and it was something that was exploitative. And I think in many respects, that coloured the judgment of a society. How do you feel about that, just from your memories?
Well, I mean, there were a few people, certainly in my classes, who I probably, in hindsight, they were probably gay, but of course they had to try and conceal it. But they were the people who were left on the sidelines when it came to the football and the hurling and stuff like that. And looking back on it, it was all wrong. Of course it was wrong, but we didn't know any better at the time, I think the teacher. Some of the teachers were, I reckon, were gay too, and
certainly some of the Christian brothers were. There's no
They
question.
were. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And yet that was all hidden. Which, looking back, it made life very uncomfortable. It really did.
Yes, no, I mean, I think we often were put into the view that gay was something that Protestants did. You know?
Well, yeah, certainly wasn't for somebody who was from the Holy Catholic, tradition.
Genetically, we couldn't be. I mean,
which is, so stupid, really, when you think.
Yes. Well, as I say, it's prejudice of the time. But what I've always said, because I left here when I was about 20 odd, you stayed here in that sense of the word. Was that something you always intended to do, or did you see your life as being linked to Ireland in a way that I always saw mine as perhaps distant from Ireland?
I don't know, was I a coward or what, but I certainly didn't have any draw to other pastures. I got involved in a family business, and I suppose that was one of the reasons that kept me around.
Indeed.
And later I started my own business, and why did I do that? Probably because I felt I had to in order to accommodate who I am.
That's interesting. Yes.
Yeah, and I ran my own business for 20 years.
Yeah.
And but again, I had to do it as a male, even though I was trans, because I felt it was allied to the construction industry, and that is not an industry for, or wasn't back then anyway, for a woman to be involved in. Easier now,
yes,
but not then.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, how Darwin would agree with this, that it's the adaptation that in many ways has been your strength, and the fact that I don't see it as hiding anything. I see that people adapt to survive.
Accommodating who I am, and that's what I did over the years. And I got to a point in the 80s when I actually set up or co-founded an organisation for trans people, and I had a dedicated telephone line in my office for people who could call it. And so every Thursday night we met in the city, in fact in what was the Parliament Inn, now known as the Turk's Head. We met up on the top floor of the building every Thursday night, and that went on for years. And was also the line was a helpline, so that and very often we got parents, we got wives of trans people. We didn't meet so many trans men back then, although I met one or two.
Yes.
But that was all, whereas there's a lot more now.
Yeah. In many respects, and this is why I wonder, how would you describe the Ireland in those times? Was this people looking for like-minded souls in that sense of the word?
Yes.
It wasn't there wasn't the open, and there wasn't the openness in the sense that you could read about this in the newspapers, or everybody say, "Oh, if you want to meet somebody, go to the George."
It was a struggle to find out anything, to get any kind of information in those days. I mean, we used to advertise. You'll remember there was a magazine back then called In Dublin.
Yes.
And we used to have a little ad in Dublin, which gave the details of the phone number, indicated that we had a social outlet, and it said in the ad, "Come dressed if you like."
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And did you get much response in those days?
We did. That phone never stopped ringing. It was only supposed to ring between 6 and 8 p.m. And from 6 o'clock onwards, it never stopped.
So, in a business sense, the demand was certainly
huge.
There. Yeah,
huge, and yet there was nothing else. Only this available to trans people.
Yeah.
You know.
Back in those days, because you mentioned at the very beginning that that language is a phenomenally important issue. I mean, did people in those days? I mean, my experience, for argument's sake, is that most people who are, say, transvestite aren't gay. Did people, were they quick to label themselves, or was it people trying to discover just through shared information? What was the situation?
Yes, there was a lot of it through shared information, really, at the end. I mean, most of the people we came in contact with back then were transvestites. And as you say, most of them were not gay, although some were, but it's like everything else, you have right across the spectrum. We met some transgender people too, but very much in the minority back then, simply because trans gender people were afraid to disclose themselves because for fear of what might happen. I mean, I often thought if people found out about me, they would lock me up and throw the key away.
Yeah. Well, medical science has developed an enormous amount since then. Is that reasonable to say?
Oh, no doubt about it. And I mean, yeah, knowledge is powerful. It's everything. And I mean, we didn't have the language back. We didn't. I mean, transsexuals we were called back then. And then it eventually moved to transgender, and now we simply use the word trans.
Yes.
But even the connotation of transsexual had the word sex in it.
Yes.
It kind of gave a feeling or an indication of something deviant.
Yeah. Well, just looking at my own experience, the first trans people I met wouldn't have been in Ireland at all. It would have been in Australia. And back in those days, and we're talking about the early to mid 80s here.
Yeah.
We even had a different description. We had pre-op and post-op. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
So somehow or other
Yeah,
that there were different choices, that there
That's
were
right.
different conditions, is the way
Absolutely.
I'll put it. And
Yeah.
in fact, it was only when I came back to Ireland that I would have met people who I would have said had fully transitioned. Now I find that we don't tend to use that pre and post op anymore because it's a nonsensical
it is.
description.
Yeah.
Is that part and parcel of the evolving of language?
Oh, all of it, yes. I mean, in TENI, we actually have a whole list of a vocabulary that's kosher, that's okay to use.
Yes.
Because an awful lot of the language that we don't like
Absolutely,
being used
yeah.
nowadays. And so, yeah, all these things have evolved over time, and people being comfortable talking about the subject.
Yeah.
I mean, we just, trans people weren't discussed at all. We didn't exist.
Yeah.
And you could argue that we still don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, trans people in those days were Danny LaRue, it was pantomime dames, it was, and in fact, in many respects, you could say, well, that's because we want to project to portray a certain way, so we don't feel threatened. We didn't really. Society at large didn't seem to care too much about trans people.
That's right. Not at all. Well, there was no understanding. I mean, I recall going on Pat Kenny back in the 80s. He had an hour-long program, and I was on a panel on that, and he, we were trying to get the message out that we exist and we're not going away. We're part of society, and we should be included, not excluded.
Yeah. Well, something, and I'm going to say this without fear or favour here. I mean, it's not even just a question of inclusion or anything like that. When I got involved with TENI about 3 years ago, I can honestly say that some of the people I met there, people like yourself, people like Sarah, particularly people like Vanessa, Broden, Victoria, some of the most remarkable people I have ever met anywhere at any time. I mean, in fact, we don't even need to look at what I would call the otherness. If we look at the individuality, the capacity of some of these people to contribute and to improve society, to me, is just enormous.
Well, the board of TENI is a fantastic board. I mean, the people on it are extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you mentioned some of them there.
And anybody I've excluded, it's only because of time. There are a lot more as well.
That's right. And I mean, we've been doing fantastic work over the last couple of years, particularly in relation to the Gender Recognition Bill, which is going through the Dáil currently. And we have done a mountain of work in lobbying TDs, lobbying senators, educating them
Absolutely.
on the whole issue of trans and what it is to be trans, and how we're not in fact any different to anybody else, and getting that message across. A lot of them have got it. They've got the message. They now understand it, and they're not as threatened by it as they were at the beginning.
Oh yes. Now when I started working with TENI in I think it was about 2013, I said it to Broden at the time, because I'm a hard-nosed, cynical journalist, of saying you'll get a political response. I think that is proven to be true in that sense of the word, that we haven't got Argentina, we haven't got what Catherine Zapone has called non-stigmatizing and inclusive. Is that a disappointment to you?
It is a big disappointment. I mean, we are the last country in Europe to introduce a gender recognition bill, and the bill that we're getting currently is so flawed. It is very, very disappointing. And we have tried to explain that. I mean, the politicians have tried to tell us that this is progressive. It's a progressive bill and they're very proud of it. Well, I can tell you they've nothing to be very proud of, because as things stand right now, we are extremely disappointed. For example, a married trans person would be required to get a divorce in order to get a gender recognition certificate. I mean, that's breaking up families.
Yeah.
That's just simply not on.
Okay, I'll come back to the issue of the quality of the bill, but isn't that the case in other jurisdictions? My understanding is that that's the case in California.
It is the case in some countries, but not in others.
Yeah.
Malta recently, for example, have introduced a whole new gender recognition bill, which doesn't require any of that. It can be done. And Malta would be a similar country to ourselves, in that it's a Catholic country.
It's an even more conservative country than ours.
Indeed,
yes.
and they're able to get around it. There's no reason why that can't be done, but it's not being done.
Yeah. I have called it second-rate legislation. Is that being a bit unfair?
No, I think you're close to it. I mean, there are other aspects. I just cited one part of it there, but there's also other ones. So, for example, if I were to get a gender recognition certificate, I would have to go to an endocrinologist. I would have to go to probably a psychiatrist, get two primary treating physicians to certify that I am a trans.
Yeah.
Why do I need such a person to tell me I'm trans?
Yes.
I know I'm trans.
Yeah. At the Rally for Recognition, where you were undoubtedly one of the stars, you were reported all over the place. I was talking to a prominent Labour Party TD, a man we both know and respect, and he was saying to me, "Yes, I think there's some leeway on the issue of GPs," and I was saying, and I would like your view on this one. I was saying, if you were to ask me which I'd prefer, because the marriage one we hope will be taken care of, I would say the age is more important. Deal with the age, because to me, trans is much better dealt with as early as possible. How do you feel?
Totally agree with you on that. Well, the fact of the matter is, there is no inclusion of children whatsoever in the gender recognition bill. This is ridiculous. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion that I knew when I was about 6 years of age that I didn't have the words then, that it was different. Nowadays they do, because they have the internet. They have all the information they need. And a child should at least have the pathways available to them, so when they're going to school, that they can go to the right schools.
Absolutely.
And not be intimidated and not be bullied for who they are. And that can, I mean, what's going on at the moment is awful. I mean, some children are forced to go to totally unsuitable schools and wear unsuitable uniforms, and that needs to be dealt with.
I find that it's one thing to say there's ignorance there. Yes, we accept that. But I also find there's an element of cruelty in doing that. I mean, because because since I have been involved in the subject of trans, more and more I've seen is the importance of age and the importance of family support.
Absolutely. I mean, they are reducing. They're saying that in the bill, they're saying a 16-year-old can proceed to transition, provided they have parental consent, provided that they have two primary treating physicians who will certify that they're trans, and provided that they get a court order, a circuit court order. I mean, how long would that take anyway?
Plus, let's be honest, by the time you're 16, most people's bodies have developed, and that's the other side of the coin.
No,
is
you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
You need to get to them before puberty.
Absolutely.
And you need to block the development of testosterone or
whatever
whichever
body
exactly.
shape. Yes, yeah.
And you can put it on hold. There are blockers that can be given to the child before puberty to prevent it from. And if there's a doubt about what they are their gender, then that can be reversed.
Yeah.
It's no big issue.
Yes.
But at least give them the opportunity to be who they believe they are.
Let's move on then. We're unfortunately going to run out of time, but one of the other major issues, because I'm saying 2015 is going to be a major year for people who subscribe to the values that we do. The marriage equality bill. How do you feel that, first of all, will go? Because you've been involved with the Fine Gael party. You must be actually proud that it's a Fine Gael-led government that is bringing in that.
Well, I'm very proud of that fact, although it's a social issue being driven by the Labour Party. But in fact, all parties in the Dáil are supporting it, and I'm really very happy about that. This whole referendum has started off with a very clear majority for a yes vote. I don't believe that's the way it's going to end up. I think there's a lot of negativity out there, and my fear is that people won't come out and vote. And if they don't come out and vote, this referendum will be lost. And that is a serious matter for the trans community, because for married trans people, if it's lost, they will not get gender recognition. It's as simple as that. Whereas if it's carried and it's a yes vote, trans people will then automatically be entitled to a gender recognition certificate. But the big thing is to get people out and vote. And it's incumbent on all of us to convince people that this is the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to do. And hopefully it will pass.
Well, that's the complacency I'm saying is our biggest enemy in this regard. Last but by no means least, and it certainly is by no means least in the sense that we'll assume that the gender bill, recognition bill goes through this year, and it has some of the changes that we're talking about here. Some people are going to then say, that's it then. Is that actually the end of trans issues, or is it the opening of a new chapter?
It is only the beginning.
Yeah.
It is only the beginning. There's a huge amount of work to be done. And a lot of education.
Yes.
And, we have good people involved in that on the ground, but, there is a lot more work to be done, and we have to get the message out there.
Yes, well, I know from my other half in Trinity College, they now, and again, in conjunction with TENI, of actually getting the health services to understand what the issues are, because that's been one of the big black holes in many respects.
It has, but in fairness to HSC have been very supportive to our TENI and what we're doing. Very supportive.
Yeah. We're going to unfortunately have to say we could talk all afternoon, but we're delighted to have Claire Farrell as our guest.